By listening to this podcast, you agree to not use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in yourself or others, including, but not limited to, patients that you are treating. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Neuroendocrine Cancer Awareness Network be responsible for damages arising from use of this podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Let's Get Real with NCAN. I am your host, Mike Wayman. Before we start today's episode with Kris Bazen, I do want to remind everybody, we've got a lot of really awesome events coming to you this year. We've got, up next, we have our Birmingham, Alabama conference. It's on March 15th. After that, we'll be going to Charlotte on April 5th. We just signed Minneapolis, Minnesota. That'll be at the end of June. We're going to be in Jersey, kind of like the Rutgers area, New Brunswick area. We'll have more information on that soon. But if you want all the up-to-date information, please make sure you go to netcancerawareness.org and follow us on social media at netcanceraware. Without further ado, our guest for today, Kris, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
Appreciate it. Before we get really started here, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, and also a little bit about your diagnosis.
Kris Bazen, originally from Canton, Ohio, Pro Football Hall of Fame, for those who know. I've been traveled. My career path is what has taken me around on this crazy journey. I am currently a freelance art director, graphic designer, primarily in professional sports. I was living in Oklahoma, actually, when I was diagnosed, working for a sports marketing agency. And that was in December of 2012. From there, I had gone back to Ohio to spend time with family, friends, seek treatment. And everywhere along my path up to this point, I've tried to find great opportunities alongside great healthcare. So, it's, again, been a long trip, been at it for over 12 years now. And yeah, feel free to fire away.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what led to your diagnosis. What symptoms were you having? What prompted you to go to the doctor, and what prompted you to eventually go to a specialist?
Honestly, my situation was unique. I had found out that I was having issues through a case of food poisoning, but my symptoms had been around for years prior to that. I think it had just been chalked up to, like how the saying goes, when you hear hoofbeats, a lot of people think horses. I was suffering the same symptoms of irritable bowel, Crohn's, so people were telling me a lot about stress management, things like that. But when I had gone to an urgent care, just to see what was going on, because I was having stabbing pains, just massive discomfort, they had me, take some x-rays just as a precautionary measure. And once they came back into the room, said, yeah, you should probably take these and go to an emergency room. I remember, that was on a Tuesday. I stayed for a couple of days, and by Friday, I was told that I had something called a carcinoma, but no one actually said the words cancer. And that was discovered through an endoscopy that I had done earlier that morning. So, yeah, it was, that was weird to me, because you'd always hear about the word cancer, but you observe, based on TV, I never had anybody in my immediate circle that had that. So my gut reaction was like, okay, something's wrong. I'm going to die,
Yeah.
Once somebody finally tells me what it is. And it wasn't until I gave myself the ability to calm down a little bit, do my research, is when I realized there were people who had been living with neuroendocrine cancer for quite some time. So I says, okay, this is manageable. I don't know what this is going to consist of. So the first thing I did was sought treatment through Oklahoma University's Cancer Center, and done treatment there, or I'd had a surgery. It was a partial Whipple procedure. The hopes they would also find my primary tumor. The partial Whipple had taken place. I remember being told that we believe we got everything, and I was on my way back to Ohio because during that time I was making arrangements with family. Again, in the event that things went sideways, I wanted to be close to my family and friends, which were 1,000 miles away at that point. While being in Ohio is when I went to seek treatment at the James Cancer Center in Columbus at Ohio State. And they were the first people that actually told me that this was, in fact, cancer, and that everything hadn't been removed based on the biopsies that had been done. So in forming a plan of attack, I had gotten my chance to experience TACE for the first time, which is transarterial chemoembolization. It's a lot, but basically what it was targeted chemo directly to my liver over the span of 2 sessions, approximately 6 weeks apart. That was to just flood my liver with chemo, as my primary tumor location was in my midgut, small bowel area. It had then metastasized, which is common for a lot of people who are enduring neuroendocrine. So that was the first step. The second step for me was finding the primary tumor via surgery in October of 2013. So from that point, things had been relatively quiet. Routine maintenance and upkeep, monthly injections of Sandostatin. And then eventually, I would say 2021 was the first treatment I had required since then, which was Y90, done by Dr. Charles Nutting in Denver, Colorado. And then shortly thereafter, I had gone to Vanderbilt to have PRRT through Dr. Robert Ramirez. So it's been about 2 years since then, give or take, and things have gone well. I get seen regularly at Levine Cancer Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. In fact, I'll be going in for my MRIs the end of this month, but there doesn't seem to be any signs of progression since that. So I'm feeling pretty good.
That's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, when you landed in Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
what had you seen a net expert or a net specialist before that point?
No, I had just done homework online. I think it was, I was just trusting the doctors. I can't really remember one of their names, but I just remember being concerned, like, this is cancer. I looking on sites and saying, like, okay, I'm trusting the doctors to help me understand this thing. Which, as I've learned over time, and talking to people like those at NCAN about becoming your own advocate, I think having known then what I know now, I probably would have taken a little more time, to do my homework. But I think a lot of it had to do with just being a reactionary and panicky. Things were addressed, though, which I'm very thankful for. But it really wasn't until I had gotten to Columbus was when I had started to figure out that there were local support groups, and I got to hear the stories of people who were living through it. Up to that point, it was very sheltered and siloed, from any sort of interactions like that. But, excuse me, pardon me for 1 second. I got some dinging because I've got some other things going on. Hopefully that's not too much of a distraction or a deterrent. That's the challenges of working in the NBA with the NBA on trade deadlines.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it was when I got to Ohio is when I really got to understand things much better. But up to that point, no.
Yeah. Now, in Ohio, did you see an expert or again you were just following the track that your doctors were kind of telling you?
I had seen a specialist, Dr. Manisha Shah, who I was being seen by at the James, and they seem to be much more versed than where I was previously. Also, Dr. Bloomston, I believe last time I checked, he was at Moffitt, but he was the surgeon who had done my tumor removal in October of 2013. I think that entire team, Erin Fittick, who was a nurse practitioner, was probably one of the biggest resources that I had at the time, just to calm me down and help me understand how important it was to stay positive, to take care of myself. Just the mental side of it was the part that was missing, but I just got positive reinforcement every time I stopped in the office. And I definitely felt as if I was dealing with people who were familiar with the subject matter and could best help me navigate at that time.
You mentioned how you kind of relocated several times.
Yeah.
So I don't think in the past, several years of this show, have we had somebody who did relocate that much. I mean, we're talking 3 times, but
oh no, at least.
Yeah. So how did you navigate treating yourself, keeping in touch with specialists, getting a local doctor that's willing to work with your team, that knows your complicated history and your complicated diagnosis?
I found it was important that in knowing the transient nature of my business, it was important to do my homework and find out holistically what made sense. So say for instance, when I left from Ohio going to Baltimore, I reached out, done my due diligence, trying to make sure that I was doing my part to have records transferred, just making sure that I was bridging any gaps in communication. I don't think I've ever made a move that did not account for being near or in those hubs where those who are knowledgeable of neck cancer were around. I'd heard too many horror stories about people living 3 hours away and having to commute in and get hotels and stay overnight. So I just always kept that in the back of my mind as a filter for places that I would entertain.
Did you find it hard? Did you find that some doctors were kind of hesitant or unwilling to work with people on, like I said, on your team, your multidisciplinary team kind of thing?
No, I was pretty much all in at the places I went. Once I moved from one area to the other, it's not to say like communications totally dissolved, but
sure,
I just leaned into the existing team that I had locally.
That's great. What if you had one specific tip for somebody who was just diagnosed with neck cancer? What is the first thing you would tell somebody to do?
Connect with a support group. It really humanizes your experience and what you're walking into, because what you need is, you're acting very emotionally, very reactionary, very panicky. And when you start to deal with people who have walked a mile and can explain to you what you're going to encounter, when you do get to those moments, you're prepared. Not entirely, but you have points of reference. You have people that, are still doing things that are productive too. Like they have families, they have jobs. They're not like solely focused on the matter at hand, this challenge that you're facing. Whereas when your only communications are with medical professionals, it can sometimes feel cold and sterile and over your head. And that makes things extremely complicated. So I would say hop online, whether it be Facebook, wherever. NCAN has been a huge resource for me. Again, to just make it real. So, I mean, it's all right, we're talking about that, the name of the podcast, but it is important to just like humanize it and make it something that is not so overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up the mental health thing. and it's something that our society is sort of very much embracing over the past 5 years, 6 years or so. It's become very prevalent, very important. More people are more aware of it. What are some of the things that you did to help your mental health during the diagnosis process, before you're even diagnosed? All that in between stuff is really, like, that's the most daunting thing, right? And then even, you dealing with all this stuff, and then eventually you're like, oh, this is cancer, and you're hearing this for the first time, and before you get all that information, and even after you get the information, these treatments aren't extremely easy to deal with and stuff like that. So what do you do to keep your mental health in check? What do you do to keep it as high spirited as it is?
I would say educating myself, reading, trying to familiarize myself with anything that, whether it be new technologies and advances in medicine, if it's looking at things like diet and exercise. When I was first diagnosed, I was a part of a church in Oklahoma, and they were just very tight-knit and very supportive, even before diagnosis. So it helped me to understand that I wasn't doing this thing alone. My wife is my biggest cheerleader. She's extremely supportive. She'll be the first one to tell me when I'm doing too much and when I need to calm down or slow down, or, mentally, if there's things I need to put down for a little while. Getting into my faith, trying to be prayerful, trying to operate from a place of gratitude, and also seeking therapy, talking to counselors. I've been fortunate to find counselors within, like cancer centers. Like I've started revisiting a therapist recently at Levine, and it's just been game changing for me because, there's a lot of things that I was probably carrying around beyond cancer, and having a diagnosis and fear of your mortality and stuff like that also magnifies and trickles over into other aspects of your life.
Yeah.
So to have somebody you can professionally unload to, because sometimes when you lean on your family and your friends and all that can be a bit burdensome,
Sure.
It's not necessarily to say that people say that, but you can feel it, and it gets to be a point in time where you're like, okay, I need to go to somebody who is a pro, because as much as they care to, they don't have the answers. They're not going to give me the thing that, allows for the light bulb to go off. So just finding the professionals too has been extremely helpful.
I think what people need to realize too with therapy, because it's definitely a lot of the negative connotation has been shed finally, with therapy and going to a psychiatrist and stuff like that. So I think it's really important that you not only go because it's a professional, but also it's an unbiased ear.
Oh, absolutely.
Because your family, no matter what, they're going to be on your side, and whatever you say, it may not be the best way to look at a situation, but if you've got somebody who is completely unbiased, you do make a lot more breakthroughs. And like you said, even you being able to fix some of those things that trickle in beyond the cancer diagnosis. I think that's super important that people realize.
What's also been helpful as I go to therapy is I bring a journal and I write down the things that we talk about, because, sometimes things can it gets deep, right?
Yeah.
And shortly after you leave the room, a lot of things what you say, they linger for a little while, but, life gets in the way.
Sure.
And it's good to have those refreshers. Oh yeah, we did talk about that. Or, oh yeah, I do have some exercises and challenges and, little tips and tricks that I can lean on from time to time where I'm starting to feel anxious or tense or stressful or overwhelmed. So it's just been, again, it's been very helpful. I'm very fortunate to have, friends, family, church, professional help, all these things to just kind of keep me on the up and up.
You got a great support system, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Now, when linking up with a therapist, you had mentioned it was through some of the organizations that you were, or the institutions that you were dealing with.
Correct.
So that just so people know, because I don't think some people know what to ask for. What did you specifically ask for to get linked up with a medical professional for therapy?
It's a great question. I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. I think I just reached out to my primary oncologist and said, listen, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm firing on all cylinders in every aspect of my life, but I'm struggling over here. Are there any resources that you have available? And they were able to pair me up. And it wasn't like I asked for a lot of things particularly. I just remember going into it, filling out the general anxiety tests and, circling the things like where I land on certain spectrums. And I think from there, I was just fortunate enough to have a person that knew how to navigate it. And it wasn't, I think they just assigned me, hey, you've got this person here. Yeah. It was really once I got to know the therapist and started to open up and just allowed myself to just fully immerse myself in the experience. I think that's what made things easy. Just willing to put myself out there. Sometimes we have a tendency to be guarded. There's certain things that are off limits. And I challenged myself to say, no, I'm going to do the exact opposite. And I think because I was willing to lay all my cards on the table, talking about the issues I face as a professional, dealing with the issues you face in our current societal climates, sure. Dealing with the things that, hey, this is on the health standpoint, that's why it was so beneficial for me to go to the cancer center and ask for that, because I've been to general therapists and psychologists before, and having a diagnosis interacts with different aspects of your life that not a lot of people know how to account for.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, I got this thing going on over here and I got this thing over. Oh yeah, there's this big thing that a lot of people cannot relate to.
Sure.
So just putting myself out there, I think has been helpful as far as like, okay, this thing should be over here. This thing is over here. This thing is over here. Like we would talk about complex traumas, for example. Like, yes, you might have a cancer diagnosis, but there are some things that are still lingering around from your upbringing, that are maybe these little triggers or landmines that you've got to account for too. So It's like, okay, here's maybe a coping mechanism for that, or it gives me the ability to slow down and say like, hey, maybe this isn't a that thing, maybe that's a that thing over there. And just being able to separate those things has been helpful.
Differentiate and put them in the correct buckets, so this way you're not blaming it on the diagnosis, let's just say.
Exactly.
Sure. And that's really great. That's really, really important. I love that. Kris, before we end here, what I like to ask everybody is, throughout your journey, it's been 13 years or so.
Yes.
Everybody picks up a little bit of something, some sort of tip or trick or some like a trade secret, so to speak. So in your time, you've had a decent amount of time to in the expertise of nets. What's one tip that you use that maybe not everybody knows?
One of my mantras is life is too short, so that's usually like a filter for how I should respond to certain things. But beyond that, I lean on this thing called deathbed living. And it's really the mindset that goes like, if I'm on my deathbed one day, because we're all going to deal with it in some way, shape, or form. Well, if we're fortunate, we get to that point where we have the ability to sit there and reflect on our lives.
Sure.
And what we've done. And when I'm in that stage in my life, I want to be able to look back and be happy and smile and be proud, not be sitting there sad or regretful about the things I didn't do or the relationships I didn't try to mend or,
Sure.
things like that. It was so, I feel being driven by that and using that as a North Star has been so crucial. Like, I want to leave it all on the field. I don't want to leave things unsaid. I don't want to coulda, woulda, shoulda. So having that understanding of my mortality has been a huge blessing in that regard.
That's great. That's great. Kris, is there anything that you're doing that anybody should know about? I know that there are some Fighting Zebra shirts and apparel going on. So if you have anything that you want to plug.
Yeah, Baze Brand is, the business that I started. It's been my graphic design service, but I also specialize in branding, graphic design work. And I feel like it's an opportunity to educate people too. Like Zebra sits right in the middle of Baze Brand. So I feel like that was unique to me. And it gives me the opportunity to share, my story in addition to providing services to people. The Fighting Zebras was something that, I felt was important. It was a little rally cry, a little small run of merchandise that I produced to show people that, listen, yeah, you might have a diagnosis, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that's the end. You keep slugging,
Yeah.
I have been, when I'm talking to my team, and I say, let's put our foot in this week's ass. Right. So that's why when you'll see some of my merch with the Zebra, he's kicking because he's putting his foot in cancer's ass. We're not just victims to this thing. We're going to impose our will on the situation. So
love it.
Yeah.
I love that. Kris, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story, being so open and honest about it. It's really great to have that. And the net community, I find, is for the most part, by and large, like just very, very giving. It's a very giving community. Everybody is willing to impart their knowledge and their journey and the stories that they've learned. They're so willing to share that to see if it could help the next person. And this is no different. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And, got to thank Bob and Mary Ann, too, from NCAN. They have been huge resources, huge advocates, huge friends. I just am so thankful to be given the platform to share my story and just to be able to help grow and help people understand what this is about and know that, we're in this together. It just means a ton to me. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. Everybody, if you enjoy this content, please make sure you like, subscribe, follow wherever it is that you're consuming this. It costs you nothing, and it helps us greatly. It helps beat that algorithm, Of course, for all of our other events, live streams, and podcasts, you can go over to the YouTube, the NCAN YouTube channel. You can find that through netcancerawareness.org, as well as our socials at netcanceraware. And we'll see you next time on Let's Get Real.